Hi, welcome to Conversations from the Alcove. My name is Caridad Svich. I'm the Artistic Director of the Alcove New Play Development Program at the Lucille Lortel Theater in New York City, where we work with artists nationally and internationally. I'm also a playwright, and I'm wearing both hats today in this conversation with Jack Holden, who is our guest. But first, I'm going to start with an audio description and then proceed to introduce you to Jack. So, I am a fair skinned person with brownish today, slightly goldish streaks in my hair. I have bangs. They're on my forehead. I actually have a ponytail that's to the side. I have brown eyes. I have roundish, tortoiseshell glasses perched on the tip of my nose, red lipstick on. I have a blue. Is it blue? Is it this blue? I have a top on. The background is dark blue, and it has got like a sun, moon, and stars on it. Feeling slightly in that mood today. And then behind me is you might see the outline of a white wall, although it's slightly grayish by the shadows. And perhaps occasionally you'll see the outline of a curtain. Both of them are blurred out, but they are real. They're not virtual. Today's guest is Jack Holden, who is multi-hyphenate, someone who does many things. Yay, we love that. Award-winning writer, actor, and director. They trained at Bristol Old Vic Theater School. Yay, Bristol Old Vic. Performed on stages. I have fun affection for them. Performed on stages across the UK and on TV and on film. Many things. I'll fast forward a little bit. Their debut play, Cruise, was nominated for the Olivier Award for Best New Play in 2022. Their follow-up, Kenrex, a true crime thriller, co-written with Ed Stambul. Is it Stambulian or Stambolian?
Stambulian.
I didn't get it right. Stambulian. Is that right?
Yeah, that's it. You got it.
Yay. Thank you so much. Premiered at Sheffield Theatre's Autumn 2024, was nominated for Once on Stage Award for Best Studio Show. It returns to the Other Place, London, December 3rd, 2025 to February 1st, 2026, and it will be at the Lortel. Hello. Spring 2026. So yay for that. I know we'll talk about Kenrex and Cruise and many other things. Jack's adaptation of Alan Hollinghurt's The Line of Beauty, wonderful novel, directed by Michael Grandage, opens at the Almeida Theatre on October 21st. They're also working on many other projects, which we might get into or not. But the case being, Jack is fabulous. We love Jack's work. And it's such a pleasure to make time for us today, Jack.
Oh, thank you so much. I'm so excited to be here and start my relationship with the Lortel. And, already getting me excited about spring next year.
Yay, so much fun. So, for those of us that know the series, we always start with the same question, which is, how is the climate crisis affecting your art practice?
Sure, yeah, I think, the first TV show I attempted to write it happened to be commissioned about the time that I was hanging out with Extinction Rebellion here in London. And so it was very much at the forefront of my mind. And I started writing an action thriller about a group of young eco-terrorists, a bit like the US film How to Blow Up a Pipeline, based on the book. And it was very much, in the forefront of my mind. And Channel 4 picked that show up and developed it quite a long way. And then, as often happens with TV shows, eventually dropped it, which was very sad. But it was, a really interesting experience for me it was my first TV show, so I didn't necessarily expect for it to go all the way. But it's always in my mind. And at that time, it was particularly, I had a lot of anger about it all, and that's what I channeled into that show. Now, I suppose it's more of a sort of simmering rage that kind of coexists with my other angers and injustices. And I suppose each of those goes into each of my projects to different degrees. And I think the thing with the climate crisis is that it's always, where do you enter it from? And I suppose so many things are interconnected in our world today that they are all interconnected. It's just enormous, isn't it? Where do you find your way in? And I'm still asking that question, still hoping to find a way in with some of my work more directly.
Yeah, does it affect at all the means of production, like how you think about like actually making the work itself?
Yeah, I think so. I think I thus far have made pretty, in inverted commas, poor theatre. It's pretty basic stuff. It's pretty pure. There's not a ton of pyrotechnics or consumables or anything. It's very much like empty space theatre, which in it, I suppose probably is a result of me thinking very sort of economically in those terms. Slightly different story with the Line of Beauty adaptation. That's quite a big play, but it's still essentially empty space theatre. It's still there's not tons of set. It's very much a box space with old antique reused repurposed furniture. That's a huge motif in the play, so it's got pretty good eco credentials, that show.
So awesome. Yeah, I mean, I think sometimes how we I've been talking a lot to writers about how to start, if they're not thinking about this already, start building it from the ground up when they're making work. Actually, instead of because sometimes people I'll apply it later, I'll start thinking about sustainability later. It's like, no, actually, if it's part of the conception of the work, then actually you've gone a long way in making that possible. And also, just demand. I worked with a company where I asked them, they were doing a premiere of my show, and I put in my tech writer that everything had to be sustainable about the production.
That's a great idea. There's a really good mission over here in our Actors Equity to encourage actors to put green riders in their contracts.
That's so great.
It's exactly that kind of thing. It's currently way more applicable to TV and film sets, which are famously very wasteful. But I think the same should apply to theatre contracts as well.
Yeah, I hadn't realized that Equity was working on that. That's really amazing, and I applaud that immensely.
Me too.
It's really important. You wear many hats, and I guess the question that I have initially is, when did you come to start writing for yourself as a performer?
Yeah, I was at Bristol Old Vic Theatre School as an actor. And that was a very, very vocational training. And so I very much focused on being a jobbing actor, primarily a theatre actor. And that's what I then did for the first few years of my professional career in London. But even only a couple of years into that career, I kind of got itchy feet and wanted to return to writing, which was sort of my very, very early original love. So I applied to the Royal Court new Young Writers Programme here in London, and I was accepted onto it with a very basic sample of writing I sent in, and that was an amazing introduction to theatre writing. And then I kind of kept it going alongside acting for a while, but it was primarily acting was my thing. And then really it was in the pandemic that I all of our theatres closed. The whole industry was in real turmoil, and I had a lot of time at home in lockdown to write stuff that I sort of had neglected for a long time. And that was the first of those shows was Cruise, which part of me was sort of thinking, I guess, quite industriously, and that I was thinking, well, when we come out of the other side of this lockdown, solo shows are probably going to be sought after because they will be cheap, easy to put on. And I'd had this idea, which became Cruise, for a long time. And I started doing morning pages, the artist's way during lockdown. And that really kind of actually then spiraled into me writing the whole piece. And then it went on eventually to go onto the West End and be nominated for the Olivier for Best New Play. And that really was the beginning of my now quite major writing career.
Which kind of stunning, for the people that don't know Cruise. Can you tell us a little bit about it, and so contextualize a little bit, because also it pairs you with the wonderful musician that's now become part of your work, and so I think that's something that our audience would love to know more about.
Yeah, so Cruise is based on a true story that I heard when I was volunteering for Switchboard, the LGBTQ plus helpline here in the UK, which is a bit like the Trevor Project in the US. I volunteered for that in my early 20s, and I got a call one day from a guy who wanted to tell me his story about moving to London in the 1980s, finding love, falling into the gay scene at the time, but then sort of inevitably being struck by HIV and AIDS. And this guy lost his partner in '86, and then subsequently thought that, well, he was certain to die because there was no effective medication at the time. So he decided to spend all his money, sell his flat, sell his car, run up huge credit card debts, because he thought, well, it's only a matter of time. And then it just so happened that he survived. It was just random luck that he survived until effective medication did come along. So that story struck me back then as this incredibly bittersweet story of, getting a second chance at life, but having nothing left in it to make it worth living. And I always wanted to tell that story. And so I turned that into Cruise, which became a sort of musical spoken word odyssey through Soho in London of the 1980s. I'm a huge music fan, and especially music from the 80s. And so it really became a kind of nostalgia tour through the different musical scenes and pubs and clubs of Soho in the 80s, as well as this story of love and loss that was actually, I later found out, quite common of men who went through that period.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. How did you decide to make it a show with music? Because again, I sort of, this also affects Kenrex, so I wonder if that's, because not all writers do that. So I think, you could have just written a solo play without music, right? So I think that, what became the idea behind that, actually having it scored, basically?
Yeah, it is. Yeah, Cruise is essentially scored throughout, and Kenrex is to a slightly lesser degree scored throughout. I think, and in both shows, I work with John Patrick Elliott, who composed and performs, and in that both entire scores live on stage next to me. So they're not so much solo shows as actually duets, really. But I think in the case of Cruise, it came from the place of being in lockdown and being, withheld, all those clubs, all those places where actually me and my queer friends would go for communion to sort of dance together and release together and be free together. They were all locked away from us. So when I was writing this, that was forefront in my mind. And I wanted, therefore, for this night, this night at the theatre that I was going to create, to be loud and explosive. And sure enough, we were able to start performing it on the 21st of June 2021, which in this country was a sort of big unlocking day. It was when people were allowed back into indoor hospitality venues with social distancing. So our first audiences had masks on and were socially distanced, but the energy of them, the yearning to be in this space, this communal space, celebrating and hearing music together, was electric. And so that was basically something I wanted to copy and paste into Kenrex, because it was so powerful. But also, just music is so evocative of place and mood. And as I say, in Cruise, that really charted the progress of the 1980s. So, and therefore the progress of music, from the death of disco through mass-produced pop into house coming over from the USA, and that developing into acid house and rave. And then with Kenrex, the music very much sets us in America, in the Midwest, in the late 70s and early 80s. So there's a lot of bluegrass and a lot of Americana. So yeah, it's just, I just feel like if you've got someone with John's talents, you've got to use him.
How did you start working with him? Was it just like you met, or like was it long-standing?
John was actually at university with Ed Stambalouian, who I co-created Kenrex with. And we had actually started developing the early idea of Kenrex before Cruise many years ago. And then, and so I met him in a workshop for that. And I was like, well, this guy is a genius. He's kind of a musical savant. He can you can say, oh, I'm thinking it needs to be a bit like this. And he creates it, and it's better than any AI tool you could find. And so we worked together on that workshop. And then when I was creating Cruise, I said to him, I know you can do folk and alternative, but can you do electronic music? And he said, oh yeah, yes I can. And that's what he did. And then he came back to fully realize the music for Kenrex.
Oh, wow, fascinating. So I didn't realize that Kenrex had been in development prior to Cruise. So that's that's really cool.
It's strange the way things work. Some things take their sweet time, and others just absolutely take off.
How did the idea for Kenrex come about? It's true crime, thriller, or in that mode. Sort of, I think of it in terms of podcast. True crime podcasts. But it's also an unusual piece. I think an unusual piece of looking at Americana, looking at bloodthirsty, extremely dark, very gothic. Kind of story. And so I wonder what led you to kind of want to play in those waters as a writer and also a performer.
Yeah, I think after Cruise, which was a really hyper London local and very much set in my community, the LGBTQ plus community, I very much sort of wanted to look outside of that. And so sort of with Ed Stambulian, I met up with him and I said, why don't we go back to Kenrex? I think there was something in that. And we agreed that it still had potential. But the story originally had struck us because we were looking for, we were doing an experiment to see whether true crime could work on stage, because obviously it's been hugely successful in podcast and box set TV series.
Right.
And it's the genre basically started with Truman Capote in Cold Blood. It's been around for a while and it is seemingly not going anywhere. And we wondered why it hadn't been done on stage. And we were looking for a story. We decided we wanted to tell a story set in America, mainly for the genre, for the true crime Americana kind of genre. It lent itself well to that. We found the story of Kenrex McElroy and the town of Skidmore, and it just kind of, we couldn't shake it because it was such a compelling morality tale at the heart of it, really, a kind of fundamental challenge of what is wrong and right and who are the good guys and who are the bad guys. And it really stuck with us. It got its claws into us, and with a story, when a story does that to you, you have to do it.
Yeah. What was the process of actually writing it? So just walk us through, I know plays take time to develop, especially something that also has music, that also you're performing everything, everything and everyone, everything and everyone. And I think of it as both shows are quite physical and quite demanding, but there's something about Kenrex, I was describing it to somebody the other day because they were like, what is this Kenrex show that's coming to the Lortel? And I was like, well, it's just fabulous for one thing, but two, this actor named Jack Holden. And then I started to describe your performance, and I said, it feels like you become like 6'5" at some points during the show. It just feels like you take up like enormous amount of space. And it's like, how did that happen? It's like literally there are moments in the show where I just feel like you just take over the entire stage, your whole body. And I'm like, so part of it for me is like this dynamic gestural work that you're doing, also vocal work, which is quite intense and quite varied in its dynamics. But there's also this feeling of ferocity about the show, and a galvanizing sense behind it. And also something cheeky and funny about it too. It's kind of like wink, wink. This is I'm telling you the story. It lives within the world of to some degree, the world of Bruce Springsteen's Nebraska, and like that kind of, we're walking the Badlands, right? Like this is sort of what we're doing. And so but I so there are many parts to my response to the show, partly, because I want to know how you get into it physically as an actor, like literally from a technical perspective, and also, what is it like to perform it? And also, it feels like it's a high wire piece, and that at any moment it might fall apart. And so I wonder how you navigate all of that.
Yeah, I think the high wire act is totally how I describe it to people. It's I'm sort of, and that's the joy of live theatre, right? It's sort of, but this is the ultimate version of that. It's like no one's going to give me a cue, no one's going to give me a line here. It's all just got to be in here and in my body. to wind back to the writing process of it, I think we were really inspired by the true crime podcast form in particular, and how you listen to it purely and you imagine these whole worlds, you see these whole worlds. You might then go on the internet and research the story a bit more, but generally speaking, people don't. They just, take everything, as truth that they hear. So there's a narrator, often a very, like sort of caramel voice, charismatic narrator, like Phoebe Judge on Criminal. And they reel you in with their storytelling, and then they present sources, like they might do a recording live in the town that this thing happened, and then they've got a phone call from someone. And so they kind of piece together this audio evidence board. And we wanted to emulate that with the form of the show. We wanted the audience to feel like they are piecing it together, filling in the gaps. And we didn't necessarily want it to be too, we didn't want to hold the audience's hand too much. We wanted to leave it up to them. And I think that imbues the audience with a real sense of power by, activating their imagination. And that then links to my performance. I don't change costumes. I don't put on a hat or a wig or get a prop. I just use my body, my sort of malleable body and face. One of my heroes growing up was Jim Carrey, and I always used to try and do his weird is in the mirror to myself and to my dad, who encouraged me. And I think, I've sort of trained myself to have a very expressive face. So when you say that sometimes I transform and become it feels like there's a 6 foot tall bad man in the room, and then suddenly there's the greengrocer in the room.
Right.
It's I guess, quite subtle but strong shifts in posture and face, and as you say, vocal quality. But for the audience, they're doing it all, and that's the joy of it. They come out the other side and they feel like they've seen 20 people. They feel like they've seen a bunch of different locations. One person in the bar after our last London run came up to me after the show and said, I've just been researching it, and they showed me a picture of the bar in the town and said, is that the bar? And I was like, yeah, that's it. And they were like, oh, okay. I had this whole image of this like saloon bar with the like saloon bar doors. And I was like, yeah, no, it's not that at all. But everybody in that audience would have had a completely different idea of what those locations and those characters were until they go and research them. And I just think that's the pure power of theatre. Yeah,
absolutely. I was thinking about a couple of things as you were talking about the development of Kenrex, and one of them was that there's something about the framing devices that you use that are quite powerful. The different sort of, as you say, the sources. I'm hearing the phone call. I'm hearing the thing. And it reminds me a little bit of, I don't know if you know this artist, Joe Frank. Did you ever listen to Joe Frank?
No.
So Joe Frank was I think his work needs to be revived. So Joe Frank was a radio personality in Los Angeles for many years. He worked out of the KCRW, which is like an NPR affiliate. Very famous for his his show was on late at night, way into the wee hours, and he did monologues. And there were sort of like tall tales, rambling, quite dark, quite surreal, quite David Lynchian in their aspect. And he had this voice, but he also worked with he created found objects. So what he did was he created sort of, I'm walking through the town, I'm stopping over here, I'm listening to so-and-so. And then he would create these reels, and he would just voice them all. But he would distort them. So you thought you were listening to like other people, and like, he was actually sourcing. He's not sourcing anything. He's literally sourcing himself, because they were all fictional stories. But people were, he was a mesmerizing performer. And I was thinking about this idea of like creating the found object. And so the notion of that, and then showing us the mechanics of that on stage, actually, which is something that Kenrex does, right? So, and I'm interested in the thing of like showing us the stuff as opposed to hiding it, and playing a kind of a magical illusion with us, and what the choices were around, showing us the wires.
Yeah, I think there's a real union in the show between very basic theatre craft and actually quite high tech sound equipment and audio trickery. So there's a lot of stuff I'm doing with my body and my voice to differentiate character. But actually, coming from the other angle, using about 12 microphones in the whole show, each with a different effect. And I've also got a microphone, on my head, which is picking up different sounds. And the audience are really in the midst of an immersive sound design from Giles Thomas, which is at times very loud, at times very, very subtle, and kind of on the edge of your hearing. And it's very satisfying. And the first time that kind of comes into play in the evening, a voice comes from behind the audience, and you just see, like clockwork, a lot of people look around to see who in the audience has started piping up. But actually, it's how effectively positioned the sound design is. And I think that kind of thing nudges the audience deeper into the story and into the world. So yes, but we do show the workings, exactly that. I'm not. There's no real kind of mean-spirited tricks about it. It's, you see me talking into the microphone, and you see that it's changed my voice, and you see the magic that's being created before you. And I think because you are, as an audience, participating in that, the trick is being done to you, and yet it still works. And I think that's the most powerful trick. There's no sleight of hand. It's just happening. We're really doing it.
Yeah, it's really doing it. It's really, it just reminded me of like so many of the companies that I love, like Worcester Group and Builders Association and, Gob Squad, and, people that just like show you the stuff, but also mesmerize you at the same time. You're like, wait a minute, how did they do that? I know it's on the TV, but wait a minute, right?
Yeah.
So I know I'm watching a live feed, but yet I'm mesmerized. So so it's that kind of thing. How did the idea of 12? I love the 12 microphones, by the way, and I won't give away for people that have not seen the show yet by the time this airs. But there's an incredible moment near the tail end of the show with all the mics doing sort of powerful, I would say, crucible-like magic in the show. And how did that idea come to be, like the idea of actually making the mics physical characters in the show?
Well, I think once it sort of mostly actually all came about in the final rehearsal process. We'd had many workshops on it over several years, but we'd never really dealt with the very theatrically difficult chapter at the end of the story, which I also won't give away.
Don't give it away.
But it requires, for most of the story, I can multi-role, I can play characters talking to themselves, and I can cut between scenes very quickly. But the finale ultimately requires all of the characters to be on stage at once, and there is still only one of me by that stage. And I guess we sort of gradually worked out through rehearsals that if the whole language of the show is on sound and is we're playing with found footage and sources and primary sources, secondary sources, and scenes and reconstructions, and we're only hearing voices, then we sort of realized that we could reverse that, and actually microphones that we associate with characters can actually become those characters in 3 dimensions, which was a really useful discovery, because it then allowed us to fill out the space with people, in inverted commas, who are kind of, their places are held by microphones. So I think it comes to a really effective, again, it's I guess it's sort of listening to what our instincts are in the rehearsal room, because you sort of think like, we all kind of agreed that it felt like it had to end this way, and if we're feeling that, hopefully that's what the audience is feeling. They go, oh, well, that surely now they're going to do this, and you go, oh yeah, they are doing that, great, of course, the microphone is the person now. And you have to see it to believe it, I think.
Yes, you do have to see it to believe it. It's a fantastic moment, and I can't wait for more people to witness it live. I wanted to segue a little bit into the land of adaptation, which you've done. You're working on the Alan Hollinghurt novel, The Line of Beauty, but also you wrote the libretto for Club Neverland, which was at the Edinburgh Fringe 2025. And so your process with both those shows, I know they're completely different from one another, but also they require different things from you as a writer. And so how do you feel? I mean, one thing, adapting a novel that's quite beloved, and taking that to the stage. And I know, I've adapted 7 or 8 novels, and I know how you have this relationship to the readers. You know what I mean? The people that love that material that have no desire to see it on stage. And then you have the people that are like, wait a minute, could that be on stage? And then you have people that don't know the book at all, right? And that just walk in blind. And you're like, oh, I'm responsible to all these people and to the book itself and to the author and to everyone. So there's that. And I think with Club Neverland, of course, it's a different thing. I think Peter Pan lives in a kind of like collective consciousness by now. But much more, unless you really want to go into J.M. Barrie's life and all that stuff. So I just wonder how you wrap your brain around both of those.
Yeah, well, you've hit the nail on the head. Really, they were completely different. And Club Neverland, as you say, the story of Peter Pan is pretty thin on the ground, really. And the gift of it is that those characters are really in our collective consciousness. So the game of the show is the audience know a little bit about it, and they know the songs because it's a jukebox musical as well, using hits from the 2000s. So there's a huge amount of familiarity and nostalgia already going on. So the joy comes for them with each character coming on stage and presenting themselves as Peter Pan or Tinkerbell, but they are our updated Club Neverland version. And there's a sort of, I guess, a joy in that kind of collusion with the audience, going, who this character is, but we've slightly changed it, and it fits in our world. So that was super fun to do. A bit more of a free adaptation, but a great structure to play with. And I was selected to come on board and write the book for it because of Cruise, actually, because that so much of that show took place in nightclub spaces in Soho. Right. This, Club Neverland really is, it takes place in the fictional Club Neverland, and the story plays out across a night there. So I do love a nightclub. So it was, that was really fun to do. And then The Line of Beauty was one of my favorite books. And I was with a friend swimming in the Hampstead ponds, swimming ponds, which features heavily in the book. And we were reminiscing about the book, and I sort of thought, why hasn't it been done on stage? And I took it to the Almeida Theatre, where I had performed as an actor several years before. And I said, could I adapt this? And I had actually found out that the rights were available. And they said, yes, please do adapt it, which was lovely. But then immediately terrifying, because as you say, the book is not just loved by me, but loved by, millions of people. And so I sort of decided to just jump straight in and start my version of it. The joy of Alan Hollinghurst's writing is that he not only writes beautiful interior prose, but he also writes incredibly funny dialogue. And that is important for a long night in the theatre. And so I kept a lot of that, and then kind of tried to blend it all together into an evening. I changed some major events around to kind of fit a, part 1 and part 2 structure evening at the theatre, whereas the book is quite distinctly in 3 parts. So I had to do some moving around there, but I think it works. But yes, I will never please everyone with it. There will be scenes that other people think are absolutely crucial to the story that I've left out. And there will be people who read it 20 years ago and can't really remember it. And they'll think, oh, that was about right. And then they'll go and read the book and go, oh gosh, it's even richer. There's so much more. There's something like sort of, craven and cheapening about putting a beautiful book on stage into just action. But equally, I just love it so much that I just want to sort of spread the word of The Line of Beauty. And if it gets more people engaged in it and reading it, then I think that's a success.
Totally. You get more, if it gets more readers, that's the joy of it. And it's also, you get people introduced to that material that might not know it.
Yeah.
And that's like a joy too. It's almost like a work of service, I think, when you adapt, because in a sense you do it out of love, unless it's just work for hire, which also happens in many cases, but mostly out of love, and you're trying to just get people, remember this material, or have you forgotten that this exists? It's so amazing, and putting it on stage is, it's also this process of reimagining it for a new audience and for a new time frame. The world is very different now than it was when The Line of Beauty first came out. And I think that, it's worth thinking about, like, how work is positioned, in this rather roiling geopolitical miasma that we're in, to put it mildly, and also, on all sides of the pond, and I think also, and in the world, and also to think about how just the attentiveness that a story like this requires may change an audience's relationship to time and space. One of the things I think about a lot is, there's, as we keep reading sort of different kind of articles scientifically about attention span, and everything gets more and more fragmented, right? It's sort of like, I can only retain 30 seconds. I can only retain 20 seconds of, I can only, and I think that changes our relationship to audiences. And I think demanding something different of them requires rewiring how they might be accustomed to perceiving the world and the relationship to it. And so, and theater is one thing that can do that, right? It is a medium that allows us to slow down time, to speed it up, to play with it, to kind of like, you're apprehending something perceptually in a different way. So I guess, one of my questions, sort of more globally about your writing thus far, and your work as an artist, is because I think, Cruz and Kenrex and the works to come that I have not yet seen, but would love to read, or, at some point see, is how you do actually play with time, and how you actually sometimes, I think there are moments in Kenrex where I feel like I'm suspended, and I'm just kind of like in a moment for a very long time, and then I'm snapped into something else that's very quick, and then I'm kind of suspended again, and then. But also in Cruise, there's that feeling of just escalation. There's a sequence in the middle of it, if my memory serves, where it's kind of things are just rolling, just going. And again, that's playing with the audience in a very particular way. So I wonder how you calibrate your use of time on stage.
Oh yeah, that's such a great question, because it's something that keeps me up at night, actually. Sometimes the passage of time on stage, you sort of think, is that clear, and does it matter? And obviously in an evening at the theatre, passage of time can be so different from play to play. And I think, as you say, in Cruise, it's sort of the nature of Michael, the main character in the 1980s, in it, is that time is running out for him. So at points it really does speed up, and he's trying to sort of slow it down and then cling on to life that he thinks is in very short supply. In Kenrex, we were very concerned with keeping the audience abreast of how much time has passed, because it's a true story, and we wanted to honor the truth of it, but also there was sort of like complicated technical stuff and legal stuff that we had to do correctly, and worked with a certain amount of time. And then we also had to get the sense that the town of Skidmore has built up enough resentment to like get really angry with Kenrex. But I suppose, and The Line of Beauty is a completely different beast, because it spans about 4 years, and that's a huge amount of time to span in an evening. Doesn't necessarily matter, but because it relates so heavily to the actual political, social history of the UK in the 1980s, and there were references to Mrs. Thatcher, the Prime Minister, and to certain events unfolding, and indeed the AIDS crisis unfolding. People will tune into those events and go, oh, okay, so we're in this year, but we were only in that year, the scene before. So there's a kind of propulsion to that's one of the hardest things that we're kind of calibrating in the rehearsal room at the moment. But I think it's one of those things that you kind of don't really know until you put it in front of people, because it's the kind of thing that someone who watches it will come up to you and say, oh no, it didn't matter at all. Or, you know, oh no, we were absolutely with you. Or they'll go, this thing stood out with me, is if that's happened, then how has that happened? And you're like, oh yeah, of course. And when you're so deep in the process, you know, it's almost impossible to work out those things, because of course you've got the whole timeline in your head, but that's exactly what the audience don't have. So yeah, that's no answer except for it's something I'm always turning over in my mind.
Always working on. So I want to go back. I don't know if you want to talk about this, but I want to go back in time to when you were in Warhorse and what that experience was like for you, and I guess how it, you know, that show is quite magical actually, and I know it's very beloved and won many awards and toured the world, all the things. But at its heart, there is this story of coexistence with animals, and this coexistence with, and I'm, you know, I was reading an article yesterday about artistry and animal rights and about humans deciding what animal rights are. Animals don't get a say in what those rights are, and like, you know, and the complicated relationship between the necessity for coexistence, which is one of the problems, again, circling back to the climate crisis, that there's a divorcing of humans from nature, or you know, a purposeful one that started in the industrial era, and then you know, circle back to also divorcing from animals, and sort of feeling like they're over there, we're over here, we don't really coexist, but we'll dictate what their lives should be. And so one of the beautiful things about Warhorse is that actually inside of the story, you know, that it was telling, there was that notion of like the life of the horse, and the caring and the nurturing and the, you know, the sadness and the tragedy of that as well. You know, sort of the beast of, in that case, sort of a beast of war, beast of burden. And so yeah, so I wonder, you know, what your, many years hence, like what your feelings are about having been part of that beautiful experience.
Yeah, it was well, on the sort of professional level, it was amazing. It was my first acting job out of drama school, and you know, I got a year contract in the West End to play Albert, the main boy in that show, and it was a dream come true, really. And it also established in me a great grounding in the kind of theatre I think I make, which is, as I say, like quite pure theatre. It's the magic of Warhorse was, it was a massive black box show with these incredible puppets that, you know, had 3 people puppeteering them. Ultimately, objectively speaking, did not look like horses because you could see the legs of the other puppeteers. But it asks you, it invites you as an audience to buy into the idea that it's a real living, breathing horse. The whole evening depends on you suspending your disbelief. And you buy into that, you enter into that contract, so that by the end of that incredibly epic show, when Joey is about to be shot by a military vet, the audience it's squeaking and screaming and shouting out, "Don't do it! Don't do it!" And that's the strength of feeling that it engenders, and it's just a wicker puppet horse. And I think that's always stuck with me as the pure power of theatre. It doesn't need to be bells and whistles. It just needs to be done, I think, with care and attention. And I think you're absolutely right. The nature of the story itself, it's kind of surprised me that they stopped it running in the West End here, because it was just endlessly popular. And I don't think it's because of necessarily some kind of patriotic, jingoistic war thing. I think that plays into it a bit. But I think actually fundamental story at the core of it, the horses being taken to war at a time of increased mechanization is a perfect allegory for how ultimately completely pointless and brutal it all was. And, you know, for the horse, you read millions of young men. And I think in a sort of in a way that sort of surprises us. We care so deeply for an animal character, but as you say, it only surprises us because we've become so sort of separated in our minds from animals and from the animal world. You know, we're surprised when we feel so deeply for a pet, but actually, why is it surprising? Why would that be surprising? That's completely natural. So yeah, it was a life-changing experience for me, that show.
Yay. First job at a drama school. I can't even imagine. That's like amazing. It's like booking the best gig ever, right? Like, it's just so cool.
Truly.
We're almost at time, but sometimes I like to ask this question near the end of the episode, which is why theater?
Oh, I always ask myself that.
Why are we doing this? Why?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, exactly. I ask it in a terrible, sort of when I'm at my most depressed, like why theatre? Why still theatre? Why am I still doing this? And then I ask it when everything's going wonderfully well. I'm like, wow, why did this happen? Why have I sort of? And I think there's a lot of ingredients in that. I think part of it is being the middle of 5 boys and wanting to stand out and wanting to get attention, and also just for some reason, maybe because of divorces and so on in my childhood, always wanting to make my parents happy and to make people happy, generally make people laugh, make people happy, which has continued into my adult life. And then I think that there's also an element of, I just from a young age loved the togetherness of it, and the fact that I've never been a very good fine artist, or sort of, even when I write, I create a lot with co-writers, or I devise, or I'm very keen to start working with literary managers and development executives and so on. I just love the collaboration above all, and theatre, when the joy of getting a show to production, of course, is getting to bring all those people on board and letting their vision and ideas to turn it into something way bigger than you could have ever imagined. And I suppose it's that, again, to come back to that sort of purity thing of people in a room telling a story. All we're ever going to do is sit by the fireside and tell each other stories, and it's just that, really. But with a bit more glitz and glamour these days.
A slightly bit more glitz and glamour. Well, so lovely to chat with you, Jack. I could go on for days. I'm such a fan. For those of you in the audience, please go see Kenrex at the Lortel Theater, and follow also Jack's work. Other things that they're doing, other works that they're imminent or before. Check out their stuff. They're really great. And as you know, if you've visited this channel before, you know that I usually say so long to you, but then stay offline with our guests just a little bit longer to say another kind of so long offline. But for now, thanks for coming to Conversations from the Alcove. Bye.